another interesting discussion hour entitled Society and the Golden Age of Cinema as part of the Cultural Ambassadorship for Alexo. I'm Sherouk Zakaria and I'm a journalist and multimedia producer at Khaleej Times. I'll be your moderator for today. First of all, I would like to thank you all for joining us today, for giving your time to this interesting session. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Hamami. For anyone who's interested in Dr. Hamami's CDs, they are at the back of this room, so please feel free to go buy yours at the end of this session. So before we start, I'd like to introduce you to the concept of discussion hour. What is discussion hour that we are attending today? So it's part of a discussion series launched by Anasi Media since 2017. This series of talks brings together university lecturers, professors, and specialized researchers to engage and exchange ideas. So it's with great pleasure now to introduce you to our guest speaker today, Razan Takash, who's a senior film lecturer at SAE Dubai. She's the star of today. She is an award-winning writer, director, producer from Jordan. She has been a film professor, lecturer, and production trainer for 4 years, teaching at multiple higher education institutes and universities in the UAE. Razan today will give us a comparative look at how the Golden Age cinema in both Hollywood and Egypt was shaped by these social values. Hello.
Hi. Thank you very much, Sherry. Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet all of you in a very nice, intimate, red environment. Today's discussion is about a very dear topic of mine, as being an age of glamour, an age of beautiful films, and it was defined by specific characteristics, and those are: number one, we had a studio system, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, and RKO. MGM later on got acquisitioned, and RKO no longer exists. We still have 20th Century Fox recently taken over by Disney. But at the time, we had these 5 studios that all were controlled by these studios, so it was a very big monopoly. Next slide, please. Each one of those studios had a brand of the kind of films that they would create. So MGM was known as the big money studio. The studio of the working class. Their films were actually a lot lower budget when you compare to MGM. And they created films that were true crime, gritty. 20th Century Fox made its reputation a lot due to one of its biggest films, dancing, a little girl who constantly did performances, and she was one of their most recognized faces. They controlled so much: actors, production, theaters, distribution, cinemas. That means films and film studios were like an assembly line. It's like a factory. So they were constantly pumping out so many films. As the monopoly, there was no space for any production company to create films outside of those big 5 studios that controlled literally everything. Next, please. Star power. So at the time, a lot of the films, these stars had very complicated contracts that really defined how they were perceived in the public. And they would also, when you get hired, create this iconic image of a star. And that's it. Just getting contracted meant you will be a star somehow. Somebody like Michael Landon was Eugene Orwitz, and they thought that the word Orwitz would be hard to say by the announcers who would promote the film, so they changed his name. And of course, very famously, in the silent era, we saw the development of sound, of course, which was before the golden era, but how to use sound and sound design. Now we talk about image and propaganda and how these films affected society and what were they trying to show. See how those were similar in our own classical history. So first, how did classical cinema rise in Egypt? By 1908, just like in Hollywood, the lives of these stars were controlled by their agents and by the studios. They were groomed, their names money, which means the quality of the films dipped. But at the time, these large studios allowed them to experiment and be creative, so we got a lot of high quality filmmaking from that era. Next slide, please. The image. Again, just as Hollywood, Egyptian cinema was also used to influence the audience in specific views on society, male and female role, and very, very happy with very happy endings for its stars. And of course, musicals. Musicals dominated the 1940s in the Egyptian industry with a generation of famous, iconic singers and films that featured their music, like of course, Kulthum, Abdel Halim, Farid al-Atrash, Layla Murad, and so on and so forth. In pop culture, most countries from the Middle East understood the Egyptian dialect and became something we all understood just from watching these films and these movies. So they introduced Egypt as an icon in our own pop culture and our own conversations. And arguably, we don't see much of that nowadays in our cinema. For example, in the 1960s, there were over 38 Najib Mahfouz novels adapted into films. That's a large number. Next, please. So how did these ages end, and what are the similarities? Well, if we look at the gold, of course, Hollywood is not over, and they claim that they have breached an antitrust law. So you can't control production, you can't control the distribution.
Thank you so much, Razan, for this beautiful talk. It was indeed delightful and engaging to the point that I had to eat your popcorn. I'm sorry about that. So I have a lot to say about this topic, and congratulations for Razan, who was able to actually.
I'm a little bit curious about the actual training of the actors of the era. Maybe as an actress myself, that makes me think about it a little bit. Because if you start from an industry that doesn't exist, how do you train the actors before they go on screen to begin with? And do you think that today, because now in Egypt, for example, I can only talk about Egypt. In Egypt, we do have film institutes, acting studios, etc. Do you think the quality of the acting that the audience expects today is different than what they were offered back in the golden era.
It was all about the look, right? They had to look glamorous, they had to look beautiful. A lot of them underwent, surgeries to look beautiful. But also, they had to be triple threats because keep in mind, during the golden era, it wasn't just acting. There was a lot of dancing and a lot of singing because musicals dominated. After 1927, when sound was introduced, there were so many actresses, especially in Hollywood, that were super famous and huge. So there was a lot of enunciation and teaching people how to talk and even to change their voice so their voice would sound pleasing. This was the rise of new wave cinema and independent. And it's because independent films dealt with real issues and they were following neo-realist films of the Italians.
In these challenging times, we do need that break and that getaway to think of things positively, to have a very constructive and healthy dialogue. So thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much for facilitating this, for bringing us together to have a positive and constructive discussion. Thank you, Cinema Aqil, as well, for providing that wonderful platform and wonderful space. I think we wouldn't have found a better space for this kind of topic. So thank you very much. And now I think we'll proceed with the award, the certificate awarding. Thank you.
Can you just hold on a second? Okay, look at the camera.
Thank you.
Okay.